Yeah. So before we move on to our topic of the day with the Pat Anger announcement, you had mentioned it to me. I saw it just here in the last half hour, and I got to admit, as I did to Corey, I thought Pat Anger, Pat Anger, Pat Anger. I know that name. Why do I know that name? And it just goes to show you that my memory is not what it used to be, because I certainly watched play a lot of football, both at the collegiate and the NFL levels.
Yeah, he was phenomenal as a player. I mean, I said yesterday, I'm recording a brief segment on the news that he was just a part of like the golden years for me of watching Iowa football. Like I said before, I think I mentioned it last week with some of those receivers. We talked about McNutt and DJK. Anger was a part of those teams too, a big part of those teams. Really didn't burst onto the scene, I think, until 2008. And was phenomenal in the league. He actually led the Colts in tackles, I believe, in 2011. And I mentioned he just struggled with injury, and sometimes the injury bug hits the best players. And he was a really good football player at that level. He's been in Eastern Iowa working finances for several years, as a frequent podcaster. So, he's comfortable in front of a microphone. I know he fit the bill as it relates to what Gary Dolphin had stated a couple of weeks ago, that he preferred to have somebody on the defensive side of the ball from the Kirk Ferentz era. It was Gary's preference. And even though Gary, I don't think, deserved to make the decision, my guess has had some influence there. Ed Podolak was not from the Kirk era, was on the offensive side of the football. Obviously, Iowa's calling card is defense, so it would make sense to a large extent to get somebody in there like Pat. And so I'm happy for him, happy for his family. He's got 3 little ones, and I don't know how that will affect his day-to-day job. I'd love to get him on the show. I'll have to invite him at some point. I have not had him on the podcast, but that was also a loaded draft class. I reflected on that yesterday, Mark, the 2010 draft class for Iowa. Let's see if I can get everybody right. So Brian Bulaga was a first-round draft pick. You had Anger was a second-round draft pick. Amari Spivey was an early third-round draft pick. Kyle Callaway got drafted that year as well. And I know Moiaki, I believe, was a 4th or 5th round draft pick at tight end, who also struggled with injuries in the league. I might be missing somebody. That's a loaded draft class, a really talented team in 2009. They were a talented team in 2010, Mark. Remember, they were the darling in the Big Ten for a lot of people, and didn't quite meet expectations, although had a heck of an effort to get in a place to maybe have a chance late. I think that was the Ohio State game, the Terrell Pryor game, I think. Unless I'm getting things turned around. I'm pretty sure that was the Terrell Pryor year. So anyways, you know that. AJ Eads, thank you. AJ Eads, was he? Yeah, he wasn't drafted in 10, I don't think.
I am scurrying for the list right here.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I might be missing somebody in there. I don't think Dace Richardson. I appreciate Doc P. I don't think Dace was that class either.
AJ Eads,
that is it. So where was he drafted?
He was a 4th rounder. AJ Eads.
All right. I just missed
AJ Eads. Here's somebody else I've forgotten about.
Yeah, AJ Eads. That was a crazy draft class when you think about him being a 4th rounder with all those other guys. Talk about the talent on the 2009 roster. That's why when people ask me, what's your favorite team of your lifetime, or you think the best team, I go back to 2009 every time. To me, there's not really much of a debate between 2009 and 2015. Now, I'm not going to take the outlandish approach that someone like Colin Cowhead does, that, because Iowa had one guy drafted in the 6th round of the 2016 draft, that means the 2015 team was a fraud. That's Colin Cowhead being a cowhead. But 2009 was insane when you think about those guys. And boy, some tragic people. I mean, the guys that we've lost from that team. You talk about Tyler Sash is no longer with us. You talk about Kyle Callaway, who was tragically killed as well. Just very, very sad. And then you see the careers of guys like Darrell Johnson-Koulianos. Maybe that was his fault. His playing career never materialized in the pros, as we talked about last week. Who else was I thinking about? Tony Moiaki, struck by the injury bug. Pat Anger, struck by the injury bug. It's amazing. Amari Spivey was a starter for the Lions at cornerback for a while. So, man, it's crazy to think about how talented that class was. And then you have, that team was, and then you have guys that had have had tremendous careers. Brian Bulaga, Adrian Claiborne, Broderick Benz has put together a phenomenal secular career. He worked with, I don't think he's on the Iowa university staff anymore, but has done very well after football. So really, really fun team to reflect on.
Callaway was a 7th rounder in that draft, and 6 total picks for the Hawkeyes in 2010. And, looking at linebacking positions and or statistics, I should say, and the conversation we had a couple months ago when it was released by several services, how well thought of this linebacking core is, and look at Jay Higgins' numbers with 171 tackles last year. So Anger had 145 his senior season. And as you mentioned before we started to record here, 5 interceptions his junior season.
And unless I want to go back for a second to the 2019. Unless I'm confusing it, 2019 was still a Sash Greenwood. I should know this for certain. I'm 99% sure that was a Sash Greenwood led safety room. And Greenwood is another. I mean, he's still with us, thankfully, but perfect segue to Pat Anger, because Brett Greenwood, I know College Game Day did a special on that years ago. Outside the Lines, at almost the same time, did a special on the Tyler Sash story. But Brett Greenwood collapsing during a workout for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Pat Anger has been along his side in his recovery and therapy process. If you missed that, I go on YouTube and look up Brett Greenwood ESPN, and you'll find the College Game Day special. I mean, it will touch you. And Kirk Ferentz was a part of that. Back in 2015, I had the privilege of being at that Iowa-Pittsburgh game. And ironically enough, that was a game where Marshall Kane hits a 57-yard field goal to keep Iowa's unbeaten start alive. Of course, they'd go on to go 12-0 that year. But before that game, you had the Swarm led by none other than Brett Greenwood with his walker as he took some miracle steps. Doctors didn't think he would ever walk again after his collapse and his I don't remember exactly what it was, something heart related, but Pat Anger has been a really good friend to him, and he's moved back to Eastern Iowa. I remember I did some research before doing that segment yesterday, how much Pat Anger spoke highly of the city of Indianapolis, and yet he moved back to Iowa. He loved his roots in Bettendorf, has been there since, has been a big help to the Greenwood family, and there's going to be a lot of really good, I would think, stories, but also just good vibes in that radio booth with a couple of class act people and Pat Anger and Gary Dolphin. And by the way, yeah, thank you, Doc P. Micah Hyde was also on that team. What a career he's had.
Absolutely. How much do you get to hear the radio broadcast? Because, of course, this is a different era than the era that I grew up in, not necessarily you, but I grew up in, where there was opportune times to catch the radio broadcast because the game simply wasn't on television. And I hit, fortunately for my viewing of college football, hit that wave of basically everything getting to television automatically. But I still remember the days when I'd have to pull up a college football game, an Ohio State game, just because it was on the radio. But because everything's accessible on television and streaming, how often do you get to tune into the radio broadcast and just check it out?
Yeah, not as much as I'd like. I'm not a type of guy, and I'm Gary meant a lot to me. I think I've said this on the air before. Gary meant a lot to me when I was a freshman in high school. He had me up in the booth for a game, a play-by-play game with him and Eddie, and that meant a lot to me as a young kid that wanted to get into something broadcasting related. Had me for a Hawk Talk with Kirk Ferentz at one of the restaurants there in Iowa City. So that stuck with me. I've always appreciated Gary for that. And always a pleasure to see Gary in Iowa City. But I don't listen to it as much anymore. I don't turn down the radio. I don't know how people do that. How do you turn down the radio? I've never understood that. I always hear people say that because I'm a big Mavs fan. I'm watching the NBA Finals. They're trailing 0-2, but I listen to this podcast with the Mavs radio guy. And he's always like, well, if you don't want to listen to the TV guys, just turn on the TV. How do you sync that, Mark? How do you sync it? somebody just explain to me how you sync it. I'd love to do it because
Why do you have to sync it?
who wants to watch a game when you have somebody make a shot and then 10 seconds later you hear the crowd erupt? That doesn't make any sense. I don't like that from a holistically. I don't like that. So anyways, I don't listen to as much as I do or as I'd like. I will say this. It's less now that I'm doing a post-game show. I used to listen to the post-game after the broadcast. You're on your way back from a game or even, the TV broadcast is over. And so you turn up the radio. And now I'm on with Coach Patterson almost immediately. So less and less, but definitely appreciate the legendary names that have graced that booth.